Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Newsroom. I'm your host Omar Khalid. But today is the 12th of November 2024 and these are the stories that we will be highlighting during the course of the show. We'll begin with the situation as far as the smog is concerned across Pakistan, and we'll also be discussing climate change and COP29. Of course, we all know that our Prime Minister Shehbazsharif is in Baku and has already talked at a roundtable for climate financing today, but his main address to the COP29 will be tomorrow. This said, he has met many other important leaders, whether it be the Turkish president or the UAE leader or other leaders as well on the sidelines of the COP29. It's an important event not only to highlight climate change as has been enunciated by Antonio Guterres in his address today, but it is also a forum to meet other leaders and to highlight the aspects of bilateral collaboration or cooperation between different countries. So this is going to be our first segment on COP29, climate change and the smog situation in Pakistan. Then we are going to discuss the Middle East situation. Today is the day 401 as far as the Israel-Palestine conflict is concerned, and there seems to be no signs of abating and no signs of any peace agreement whatsoever as far as the different peace agreements that had been in the pipeline, whether it be the one backed by Joe Biden or the recent one by Egypt, the 2-day ceasefire. We don't hear of that, but we are hearing of more and more casualties in Palestine, in Lebanon, and also skirmishes in Syria. What is the end game? This and more will be discussed in our second story. Then we are going to discuss the two important stories. The first, ladies and gentlemen, concerns the World Pneumonia Day. The World Pneumonia Day that is being observed across the world today, and of course the day emphasizes the importance and impact of pneumonia, especially among children under the 5 and the elderly, who are the most vulnerable. Finally, we'll be going to talk about a new study on the moons of the Uranus, which kind of gives us a hope as far as life is concerned. They say there could have been oceans in some of the moons of Uranus, and that could, that kind of makes you speculate about other forms of life that could have existed, that may still exist in some part of our galaxy. This will be our last story. Let's begin with our segment, the first one, and that concerns smog, climate change, COP29, our Prime Minister in Baku, and of course the important developments that have taken place around the COP29. We've been joined by two guests. Let me introduce them to you one by one. Waqar, Sherazi, who is a climate expert, joins us in the studio. Thank you very much, Waqar, to have joined us. And in the studio will be joined by, online rather, will be joined by Maryam Shabbir. She's an environmentalist. She's there. Maryam, good to see you after a very long time. So let's begin with you, Waqar. Let's begin with the smog situation. Now, the AQI is around 418, Lahore, Multan is above 900, up to, we all know about, just for the audience who does not know, that 50 AQI is supposed to be normal. Anything above 50 AQI is not a normal environmental situation or condition, and that is why we have highlighted the numbers. In some places in Lahore, the air quality index has also crossed 1000 in the past, and still we are hearing of some areas in the region that still have the AQI above 1200. How long could this situation, Waqar, persist?
Let me add a comment on that. Islamabad in last week was the 7th air polluted city of the world. It is not only about Lahore and Multan and rest of the areas. We have been observing a smoke situation in Islamabad from last 5 or 6 days. So in last week, as I have shared, that Islamabad was the 7th most polluted city on the globe. So it is an alarming situation, and I think that it is directly because of the carbon emissions of fossil fuel burnings and a social behavior which we lack in terms of corporate social responsibility or a civic sense, where everybody amongst us is contributing to the climate system intervention, which is not good for the climate and resultantly is not good for us.
All right, but how long could this persist in your point of view?
I think that a meteorological anticipation can tell us that how long will this persist, because there is a low pressure or there is a high pressure in these days over Pakistan, and there is a less movement in the air. So whatever we produce in terms of the fossil fuel emission here remains in the air. So I think that the situation will prevail at least 2 weeks, unless it rains.
All right.
Yeah.
Maryam, what kind of precautions in your point of view need to be taken as far as the smog is concerned? I mean, the government has taken some measures, outdoor activities have been banned, commercial activities are to end at 8 p.m. A lot of education institutions have been closed. Safe City is taking action against polluting vehicles and many more such more effects. Are these enough? What more needs to be done? And what needs to be done by the public at large as well in order to prevent themselves from the after effects or the side effects of smog?
Well, thank you, Omar. There is a lot which needs to be done, actually. There are like steps, and I think these are the right steps, but the problem is the implementation. And I think the responsibility also lies on individual level as well. For example, the government has put a ban to stay indoors around 8 o'clock, and there's a ban in Lahore, areas of Lahore as well. But and schools are closed, but we also see that the implementation is lacking, and public, they are not bothered, and they are out there shopping and eating and everything. So it's to me, it's more of governance challenge at this stage. And I think EPA, Environmental Protection Department, needs more human resources actually to implement these steps. Targeting vehicular emissions and the transportation sector is the right step, because that is the major contributing factors towards smog. But how much that would be implemented is a huge challenge because of the lack of the human resources with EPA and the relevant departments. What needs to be done at individual level is, of course, that there is a lot which needs to be done. And the first step is for the public to stay indoors when the government has announced to not step out after 8 o'clock. Reduce or minimize your shopping or dining out or everything, because the vehicular emission, it emits the wear and tear of course, the tires. It contributes to particulate matter, but also it is contributed by the industries. So live monitoring by the government of the industries is a very good step, I believe. But would those industries be shut down or held accountable, or in the longer term, tech innovation would be the way forward for industries? And I think that we need both short-term and long-term to tackle with this issue of smog.
All right. Waqar, our Prime Minister, along with the delegation, is in Baku as we speak, and he has already met many important leaders on the sidelines from countries such as the UAE, Turkey and others. But he has also participated in a climate finance roundtable that was chaired by Pakistan, in fact. How important is Pakistan's commitment as far as climate change is concerned, and how important, for example, was today's roundtable and the Prime Minister's address on this very forum?
Well, Pakistan's commitment to the climate change is obvious. We are producing less than 1% of the total carbon emission of the globe. That is 0.6% precisely. But despite that, there is a oxymoron situation that despite that we are having smog inside various cities of Pakistan. That is a different story. But as regards the climate finance deals with the finance which is required to perform those activities which can reduce or which can hold the rise in global temperature and which can reduce the carbon emission throughout the world. There was a concept that the mega companies and the governments around the globe will contribute to the climate finance to speed up and to actualize the climate action. And it requires a very large and massive amount, that is $400 billion a year for next 10 years, which sounds to be a very tough ask, very big ask, but it seems that the world commitments are not materialized.
We saw they were not materialized in the last COP as well.
Yeah, and we have been observing again in America a change in form of the new government. We all know that during the Paris Agreement, America made a commitment that they will put their share into the in curtailing the global temperature rise and in reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. But in the previous tenure of Donald Trump, the President of America, America stepped out of it. So there are serious concerns again that whether America would be fulfilling its commitment of Paris Accord in 2015 or not, and it will have certain implications on the climate itself.
All right, Maryam, coming to you, when it comes to Pakistan's stance and of course the different meetings that our Prime Minister has had, will continue to have, the different forums that he will be talking to, whether it be this climate finance roundtable conference that he chaired, whether it be the high level glaciers 2025 action for glaciers that will be organized by Tajik President for the protection of glaciers. Pakistan's stand revolves around 4 or 5 points, and let me just highlight them for you: loss and damage, adaptation, mitigation and means of implementation, predictable financing to address developing countries' climate goals. Do you feel Pakistan's stance at COP29 will be accepted or implemented in some way whatsoever? Because we've seen last year the whole loss and damage that was initiated by Pakistan, but at the end of the day, a lot of pledges are made, but those pledges are not really implemented in letter and spirit. What are your expectations this time?
Omar, last year, the establishment of loss and damage fund itself was a huge success, although the journey was really long. It was almost after like 3 decades of the efforts of the developing countries, but at last there was some progress. And there are funds being contributed by the developed world, but the problem is that those funds, the way it is given to the developing countries is the way Pakistan has objection on that, and lots of other developing countries also have objection on that, because those are not debt free, and those comes by certain institutions, and there's certain process which is not feasible for Pakistan to work on mitigation, adaptation, and migration issue. I was just listening to the speech of Prime Minister of Pakistan, and I'm so glad that the way he was pushing for the need of climate finance, his ask for like debt-free finance, which is like very valid demand from Pakistan, being a vulnerable country to climate change because of the rich world, and the ask for 6.8 trillion by 2030. It's a very fair ask by Pakistan, because in 2022, 1/3 of the Pakistan was underwater, and that was because of the carbon dioxide emissions and methane emissions by developed world. So let's see that how those negotiations will unfold in coming days, because this is literally like second day of the negotiations, and it will go on for like until 22nd November. And I am a bit optimistic after the establishment of loss and damage fund last year that there would be some progress. Of course, it can't be 100% in favor of like developing countries, and it can't be 100% in favor of like developed world. But I think there would be compromises on both sides of the world to reach to consensus, and that's the spirit of the Conference of Parties every year. But I stay optimistic because there is light at the end of the tunnel, I would say.
All right. Waqar, governments at the COP29 approved yesterday new United Nations standards for international carbon markets as a key step towards allowing countries to trade credits to meet their climate targets. Now, COP29 President Mukhtar Babayev has hailed this breakthrough, but he says more work is required. And other key aspects of this framework still need to be negotiated, but the decisions bring closer a long-sought United Nations-backed market that is trading in high-quality credits. Will this open the door for a fully fledged market?
I think that, as my colleague mentioned, that in the last year, it was a juncture, a game changer by the Pakistan, that loss and damages funds were first time recognized by the international community on the table, and that was included on the request of Pakistan on the agenda of COP28 last year.
Yes.
And this year, this is a remarkable achievement. I think that it is very much clear that the developed countries, they contribute more in greenhouse gas emissions. Majority of them are industrial countries, and they contribute more in greenhouse gas emissions, including carbon dioxide. With regards to the carbon credits, those countries, those who are not contributing more in carbon emissions, but they are consuming carbons by afforestation, by introducing the strategies which consume the carbon footprint, and they are creating, in this sense, the carbon credits. Previously, it was raised that the carbon credits would be purchased by the developed countries of the world, then it was dormant. And this year, this achievement or this move shows a seriousness towards creating an environment where the poor countries or countries all over the globe are incentivized to produce more carbon credits and to support the climate system.
All right. Maryam, almost a decade has passed since the Paris Agreement that was agreed upon in 2015, but not much has happened as far as the Paris Agreement is concerned. Antonio Guterres, the United Nations Secretary General, highlighted this, but he also talked about other important issues such as emergency emission reduction, fair and effective carbon markets, delivering of new economy climate action plans by next COP. This is a warning that he gave to all the countries who were attending this COP. He talked about climate justice. He talked about tearing down the walls of climate finance. He said, and I quote, that a deal is a must. He talked about the new finance goals and 5 important points around that. And he also said something that I feel is very important. He said climate finance is not a charity, and he said that the clock is ticking. Does the world comprehend the gravity of the situation? Because of course Waqar slightly pointed towards the US as well, and now that there's a new administration that has not been very favorable towards the Paris Agreement or climate change as an issue. What should the world look towards as far as going towards some kind of a positive achievement in terms of climate change is concerned?
Well, there's a lot which needs to be done, and I think I agree with Antonio that the clock is ticking. And earlier there were discussions around limiting 1.5 degrees, and I think we have already surpassed that. There is no more discussion of 1.5 degrees. You see, the business as usual emissions of carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases, it is still continued by the developing and developed world, and of course the contribution by developed world is of course more. But the problem is that the way these should be reduced with their targets, that speed is not there. And I think highlighting the need to act now, because we don't have time anymore. Earlier, we used to talk about like in 5 years or 10 years or next 20 years, the climate change would happen and there would be more flooding and glacier melting and, all sort of climate change impacts. But it's already happening, not only in developing countries, but also in developed world. So the clock is really ticking. And I think the developed world must act and reduce their carbon dioxide emissions and methane emissions, which are like greenhouse gases, but more there is like the need for climate finance. The loss and damage fund is the right of the developing countries. It's not aid. I have a huge problem with the word aid, which is being used by the developed world during these negotiations. This is not the aid. This is the compensation of the losses you are creating because of your emissions in developing world and underdeveloping countries. So I agree with Antonio that it's not aid. It's the right of developing and underdeveloping countries and least developing countries, the term they use at Conference of Paris during negotiations. So the developed world must reduce their emissions, number one. Number second, based on the Paris Agreement, they need to work on technology transfer, which is like tech innovation in industry and also other sectors. And then the training, which we call capacity building under Paris Agreement, that's their responsibility. But also I feel the responsibility lies with developing and underdeveloping countries to reach out to them. The governments should continuously be in touch with the focal points in developed world, and continue their negotiations not only during COP29 but materialize those discussions and whatever will be decided later on to get in touch with the responsible institutions and materialize those resources. That's very important, because if a decision is made at COP29 and there is some progress and the developing countries are not reaching out and those governments are not reaching out to materialize those decisions, there is no point of discussing any of these. So the more responsibility lies, I would say, on developed world.
Thank you very much.
Also,
thank you very much, Maryam, to have joined us. We're a bit short of time, but thank you very much for your contribution, and we look forward to more such discussions during the course of COP. Thank you. Let's come to you, Waqar, and there are two other comments that kind of stayed with me during the course of today's proceedings. One was by the Malaysian head of delegation at the COP, who talked about plastic pollution, and she said that all of the world, almost all of the citizens have plastic in them because of the microplastic that we are ingesting one way or the other. She talked also about peace and sustainable development. She said that people, the planet and the people should always be put first. She talked about stopping all wars, and he said, let us aspire to inspire before we expire. I like that comment, so I kind of retained that. Secondly, NASA astronauts also joined them. I mean, they had recorded one feed in which they talked about how they are seeing the world changing from around a couple of hundred kilometers. When you look at how climate change is affecting the world, it's also quite alarming from them, from a point of view, an exterior point of view. Looking at these comments, is there, I mean, I have to really put it out there, is there a real understanding of the destruction that is being caused by climate change and all the factors that contribute to climate change? Is there some kind of a voluntary mechanism to put a stop for it, to pause them, or to completely change direction?
Let me share some of the fishy things with you. It has been said generally that the international community, especially the European community, they are not committed towards reducing the greenhouse gas emissions and to curtail the overall temperature increase below 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial level. Why? Because it has been said that if the world temperature increases, 2 of the freezed ports of Europe and Russia would be melted and they would be operational. So people suspect that there has been a seriousness towards the commitment of curtailing the global warming, which is actual implication of the climate change. Secondly, it has been said that the climate change would affect third world rather than the European countries and the other side of the globe. So people think that there is a lack of commitment. The third thing is the political economy. The politicians around the globe, they make commitments to their own people that if they come to the power, they will give them with subsidies in terms of food, in terms of consumable goods, and in terms of rest of the things. So it affects the overall commitment of the international community towards the climate finance, which then affects the adaptation, which then affects the climate action, and which has further consequences. It was the reason that the loss and damage funds was not committed by the international community, and the international community were reluctant to approve the loss and damages funds. And despite approval of loss and damages funds and climate finance debate, the pledges are never materialized up to their 100% commitments. So I think that there is a lack of seriousness. There are multiple variables, and I think that international community, the global population, will have to understand that human race is at the verge of being extinct from the globe. It was for the very first time that the COP agenda included a climate ceasefire request. And what we have observed in a small strip of Gaza and Lebanon, that millions of metric tons of the explosives have been poured on the people, and which certainly has the impacts on the overall climate of the globe. So I think humanity will have to understand, the political leadership of the world will have to understand that we are the ones. They will
have to prioritize, basically they will have to prioritize the people and the planet first.
We have to prioritize ourselves because we are the people and we are the habitants of the planet.
True. What about this climate increase? The EU's climate monitor says this year is virtually certain to be the hottest ever in recorded history, with warming above 1.5 degrees Celsius. This was also something that was highlighted by Antonio Guterres during his speech to COP29 today. With this new milestone of temperature records, can something be done?
Let me share that, as you have shared, that it was the hottest year, the previous one. It was the hottest year on the other side of the globe, in Canada and in Asia and everywhere. And the Prime Minister has rightly emphasized today that the sources of clean drinking water, that are the glaciers of the world, are melting.
True.
So humanity is losing the drinkable water. On the one hand, it is for the first time that the globe is observing a population of 8 billion individuals. That has never happened in the history of globe. On the other hand, the sources of drinkable waters are shrinking. So you can understand the severity of the situation, that on one hand the demand is increasing, on the other hand we are reducing the supply. So there is a serious alarm, a threatening situation. But I think that with this increase of temperature, Canada has shown a remarkable achievement, that they have reduced their carbon emission with 1.5% than that of the previous year. But there is a flip side to that as well. Germany has made a commitment that by 2030, 100% of the vehicles within the Germany would be electric vehicles, that is renewable energy, zero carbon emissions, and Germany would be a country with zero carbon emissions. But do you know that the electric vehicles are run by the lithium batteries, and lithium is a water intensive procedure. The processing of lithium is a water intensive procedure. So to fulfill the demand of lithium batteries, the complete fresh water reservoirs of Peru, because Peru is the country which would be providing lithium for Europe, is required. It means that the cost of the clean air in other parts of the Europe would be paid by a poor country, that is Peru.
So this is not this is not a balanced situation. There is no equilibrium whatsoever, and I don't know how this is going to move forward. But of course, there are a lot of days in front of us as well. We are just the 12th today, and we are here till the 22nd as far as the COP29 is concerned. So let's hope for the best. Let's hope some positive discussions come as you know, in these coming days to move towards an equitable solution to this climate crisis that the world is engulfed in. Thank you very much, Waqar, Sherazi, to have joined us. Let's come to our second story, and that concerns the Israel-Palestine conflict that has gone to its 401st day. And of course, we had never thought, I mean, I always say that we had never thought at one time that this conflict could, you know, extend through so many days, and not only Palestine, but also Lebanon, but also Syria, but also Yemen. And we don't know what the actual end game of Israel is as we speak, and a lot of uncertainty as to how things will move under the new administration. We've been joined by Dr. Maleeha Lodhi. She's a former ambassador to the United Nations. Thank you very much, Dr. Sahiba, to have joined us. A long time coming, this discussion on Israel-Palestine, and welcome back after a small hiatus. I'd like to move towards the West and understand the new administration that is about to, you know, take the governance of the US from the January of 2025. When we hear or have heard Mr. Donald Trump talk about stopping all wars, what kind of perspective does he bring to the Middle East as far as stopping the war in the area is concerned?
I think we have to first recognize that President-elect Trump is more pro-Israel than even President Biden was. And therefore, I don't think we can expect to see a man who will show much empathy for the plight of the Palestinian people. He has said, yes, that he wants this war to end, but he's also told Israel, finish the job, as he put it, finish the job quickly. That means that he has supported Israel's assault on Gaza, as well as the actions that Israel has taken against Hamas and Hezbollah. There's no question that both the Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration are united. They're in common agreement that Israel should do what it claims to be doing. So I don't know what he will actually do. I think if he wants to see a ceasefire in Gaza, he might well want to do that. It will happen on Israel's terms. I think the US has been concerned about a widening of the war. And certainly I think the Trump administration, whenever it takes office, will also be concerned and will want to limit it. So, you know, we have to wait and see. It's not until January, as you yourself said, that we will know exactly what the Trump administration's policy is going to be on Palestine. But Trump himself has not been a great supporter of the two-state solution. He's shown no enthusiasm for that, and he and his family.
He had been put in Palestine, had been installed in Palestine during his tenure.
Well, some of the most negative steps were taken during his first term, moving the diplomatic mission rather, from their own diplomatic mission from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, for example. I mean, which was condemned by United Nations General Assembly resolution. I happened to be there at that time. I voted on behalf of Pakistan for the resolution that condemned the United States action. But, as I said, we have to wait and see. We don't know exactly what he will do on this front. I was saying before that his family has very close relations. He himself has very close relations with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who once described Trump as the best friend that Israel has had in the White House.
Well, Trump himself said he is the best president that Israel has ever had. Anyways, when it comes to Palestine, ma'am, the number of casualties keeps on increasing. It has surpassed 43,600 as we speak. And of course, those who have been injured has surpassed 102,000. Then we have all the bombardments that are going on, even in the refugee camps, whether it be Beit Lahia or Jabalia and the other camps. The Palestinians are safe nowhere. They are told to displace themselves from one place or the other, and then they are bombarded upon. There is a lack of food, medicine, basic health facilities and basic facilities, necessities of life to sustain themselves. And so the United Nations also talks about a situation of famine that is slowly and steadily creeping within Palestine. What are the steps that need to be taken right now in order to at least, comfort the Palestinians in form of providing them food, water and basic health necessities?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, the war has to end. Comfort, their lives are at stake right now. You yourself have cited the latest casualty figure, which is humongous. So I think first and foremost, this war, the bombardments, the airstrikes have to end. And then Israel has to provide access for assistance to go in, which it is not doing. There are reports that even the United States is asking Israel to provide this access, and Israel is not responding, perhaps because it believes that the Biden administration is now so lame duck that it doesn't need to listen to it. The UN has been making urgent calls for access. As you know, Israel has also banned UNRWA, which is the main relief agency, UN relief agency for the Palestinian people. So, this is a very dire situation. So when you say what needs to be done, it's pretty obvious. It's the bleeding obvious what needs to be done. The war has to end. The bombings have to end. Israel has to be told that it must cease the war that it has imposed, and it must allow assistance to go in, humanitarian agencies and the United Nations agencies to function in Gaza. And so, none of that is happening, unfortunately. It's very tragic.
That is extremely tragic, Dr. Saiba. But the fact is also that when you look at the statements that emanate from the Israeli cabinet or the Israeli leadership, it seems that they are hell-bent on extending their so-called and moving towards the objective of a greater Israel. Smotrich, the far-right finance minister, has said he had ordered preparations for the annexation of the occupied West Bank in the hope that 2025, quote-unquote, he says, with God's help, will be the year of sovereignty in Judea and Samaria. This has been widely condemned by others, and also Joseph Borrell, the EU chief. I don't understand, but kindly enlighten me as far as, because you've spent time at the United Nations, you have been a diplomat for decades. What do you feel is the Israeli end game here? Is it greater Israel, or is it even beyond that?
It's pretty obvious what their end game is. They have moved away many years ago, especially under Prime Minister Netanyahu, from a two-state solution. They're trying to impose a one-state solution. They want, it seems, to carry out ethnic cleansing to the extent that they can. They want to eliminate the people of Palestine and occupy their territory. Look at what Israeli settlers are doing in the West Bank. What is that? What does that indicate? So the end game is very clear. The end game is a one-state solution and a complete rejection of what the international consensus is. The international consensus as embodied in UN Security Council resolutions, not one but several, is a two-state solution where there is Israel, but there is also an independent, contiguous, genuinely independent Palestinian state whose borders are based on 1967 on the 1967 borders with Jerusalem or Al-Quds as its capital. Now, Israel rejects that. Israel does not want to do that. And therefore, it is doing everything in its power to impose the very opposite, which is, as I said before, a one-state solution. Although, it's no solution, but that's their concept of a solution, and therefore that's their end game.
Dr. Sahiba, but this conflict is going beyond Palestine as well. We have seen what is happening in Lebanon. We have seen what's happening in Yemen and in Syria as well. There's also resistance by the Hezbollah, by the Houthis, but nevertheless, the skirmishes continue, and with time, we see more and more area or regions of the Middle East and getting engulfed in this war or in this conflict. Coming to Lebanon, when you look at the number of casualties, the number of displacements, which is in the hundreds of thousands, people have moved to other countries, people have moved to other areas of Lebanon as well. What does Israel want from Lebanon? Does it want a replication of what it is doing in Palestine?
Well, they can't occupy Lebanon. They can occupy Palestine, but they have occupied Palestine to all intents and purposes. Lebanon, basically, they went in first to destroy Hezbollah and to uproot where they thought that there was popular support for Hezbollah. They destroyed all those residential areas. You know that. The aerial strikes have continued, actually. They've continued even today on Beirut and on South Lebanon. So the aim is the same. The aim is to weaken, destroy, and eliminate what is called the axis of resistance. And the axis of resistance consists of Hamas, Hezbollah, and its other supporters in the region. So Israel's game is very clear, and its aim is very clear, to destroy all kinds of support that the Palestinian cause gets from different groups and from people in different parts of, the neighborhood, let's say.
How do you see this resistance by the Hezbollah in Lebanon or by the Houthis as far as Syria is concerned and also the Red Sea is concerned? Do you feel this resistance is kind of putting a dent into what Israel has been wanting to do in the Middle East? But of course, both of them are being criticized to be extremist elements as well. But isn't Israel, a flip side of the same coin? Isn't it as extremist, if not more, than these other groups that it is pointing fingers towards?
Well, Israel's aim has been to weaken, as I said before, the axis of resistance, and it has weakened it. It will take time now for the axis of resistance, particularly Hamas and Hezbollah, and its supporters in the region, to rebuild its previous strength. This is not to say that resistance is completely gone. It hasn't. But it's certainly much weaker than it was a year ago when Israel began this war. So, this is a very dire situation. It's a very grave situation. And, one doesn't know how long this will go on unless the United States intervene decisively.
Of decisiveness, what about the peace deals that have been, put forward? The famous Joe Biden 3-phase peace deal, followed by the 2-day ceasefire deal that was pushed by the Egyptian side. We don't hear of all of these peace deals anymore. So, will there be any peace deal in the future? What are your expectations?
Well, as I said before, Netanyahu is not interested in any peace deal. So, there's no point talking about peace deals that were being brokered by either Qatar or Egypt or other countries. They didn't go anywhere. They didn't go anywhere because Israel was not interested. It's only interested in continuing the war, which it is doing. So the only prospect for the war ending has to depend on what the United States under a new administration decides to do. Because as we've seen, the previous administration failed, or they simply had no will to stop the war. They didn't use their leverage. They never stopped arms supplies to Israel, and they continued with the diplomatic support. So we have to wait and see whether the Trump administration would want this war to end, as Trump himself has said. But again, war has to end on terms that can then bring durable peace and not just a temporary pause in the fighting.
All right, final question, Dr. Sahiba. Will diplomacy be given a chance to end this conflict, and will the United Nations, could the United Nations play some kind of a constructive role in doing that?
The United Nations is what the Security Council is, and the Security Council is what the 5 permanent members are. And among the 5 permanent members, if there's no agreement, as there hasn't been for 1 year, then you're not going to see a UN role. The UN doesn't have a life beyond its member states. It's not a supranational body. It's an intergovernmental body. So therefore, when you say, will it have a role? No. Well, yes, it will have a role even if only if the United States wants it. The other countries do, but the US has stood in the way. Several times it's exercised a veto against a ceasefire. So, diplomacy only has a chance if those who are working in that diplomacy are interested in diplomacy. But we've seen the US under Joe Biden really not pushing diplomacy to the extent that it should have, and using its leverage with Israel to stop the war. They failed to do that because they didn't want to do it.
I agree with you. I couldn't agree more. Thank you very much, Dr. Maleeha Lodhi, to have joined us and to have discussed, of course, this this continued situation of conflict, of perpetual conflict in the Middle East that has now entered its 401st day. I mean, who could have imagined this? This is a conflict that could go on or would go on for such a long time. I mean, surpassing a year. Last 2 stories. First are on the World Pneumonia Day that is being observed across the world, including in Pakistan. The day emphasizes the impact of pneumonia, especially among children. We all know pneumonia is a chest infection and is an infection that really obliterates the youth, the breathing and chest-related functioning of children or adults alike. Elderly are also extremely vulnerable when it comes to pneumonia, and the global day aims basically to highlight prevention methods or also advocate for better treatment options and reduce the mortality rate when it comes to pneumonia. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, a new study on the moons of the planet Uranus has raised many chances of presence of life at some point in the moons or in Uranus. The planet Uranus and its 5 biggest moons may not be the dead sterile worlds that the scientists once had thought it be. This all goes back to the Voyager and the trip that it had made and the results that came out, and a lot of speculation was made, and they thought that there would be no life. But in fact, by the time the Voyager had passed through Uranus, it was a time and it passed at a particular moment. That is what the scientists now realize, and they are looking at the data once again, and they realize that in fact what they were inferring was incorrect, and in fact Uranus and its moons could have been harboring life at one point of time. Extremely important times to understand life in other planets and other solar systems. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to an end of today's newsroom. We'll see you inshallah tomorrow with new stories, segments that pertain to us, you and Pakistan. Stay safe. Allah Hafiz.